So on to the meeting proper. First of all, declarations of interest. I trust everybody is keeping their declaration of interest form up to date. I have submitted my declarations of interest, and Joe is looking at them, and I've made some modifications to them. I think I won't go through them all because they will be a matter for the record in due course. But the ones that people should be aware of is I'm still Deputy Chair of Surrey and Borders Partnerships NHS Foundation Trust, working out how to hand over with and support the new chair in there as I move on. And I'm in NHS terms, I'm on the board of the Health Research Authority, which oversees research in the NHS. And I'm on the Workforce Training and Education Committee of NHS England, which in old money was Health Education England. And my wife is CMO of an acute trust on the South Coast. I also need to remind everyone that we are in the period, a bit like Twitter, formerly known as PERDA. We are in the election period today, and therefore, if any of you are motivated to make political statements in the course of this meeting, I would ask that you refrain from that. I guess the likelihood is low, but it is a requirement that we do that. Unless there's anything else, minutes of the last meeting. First of all, are people who were there happy that this is an accurate record of the minutes? Thank you. In that case, we will sign them as such. Matters arising, there are two matters arising. One of them is in train, and I believe up in front of is being considered by the exec going forward, and the other one is completed. Has anyone got anything they want to raise about the matters arising at this stage? No, thank you. In that case, Neil, you're going to take us into service user and carer involvement focus, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. So at this part of the meeting, I think many boards would have a service user or carer story, somebody talking about their experience. And what we've been doing at Oxleas is to challenge ourselves to do a little bit more than hear experience, but to ask ourselves, how is the experience of our service users and carers being used or listened to within services, not just by our board? This fits with building block 2 of our strategy, which is about involving service users and carers. And so in some way is something of an update of how are we using people's experience to improve things? How are we preparing people? How are we supporting people in doing that? Because it's actually quite a difficult thing to go from using services, having those experiences and being able to bring them to a staff group and use them in co-productions. So the presentation today is in line with that. The reason we use films is actually because many service users prefer that. They describe it as being quite stressful coming here. I don't know what they mean, but I think we can understand that only for a few, even though last time we had a really nice in-person presentation, what people tell us is that they feel they can create more focus by using a film because they can edit out the things they wish they hadn't said. That I can completely understand. So the film today and the focus today is on one aspect, which is I really wanted to emphasize the relationship between involvement and quality. Quality is one of the main partnerships that we need with our involved infrastructure, because actually that's where a lot of the change will be happening. So we thought, let's do a joint presentation just looking at quality. So in the report, there are some general figures about the number of quality projects and how many of those are co-produced. And I'm really happy to say that over a 5-year period, it's gone from 20% to 60%. This is really remarkable. And actually what that's telling us is that the troops out in the front line out there, the frontline clinicians are seeing this as a kind of more business as usual when they want to do change programs, that they're listening to service users and carers. The film today focuses on just one of those, which is our improving live visits. Improving live visits is a sort of CQC preparation. I've phrased it, getting us CQC ready. Of course, we're not trying to get ready for the CQC. We're trying to get services as improved as we can using the CQC lens. So we have a couple of our peer engagement facilitators who are part of the involvement role, talking about their experience. And there's a 7-minute film I'd like to show you where they talk about the experience that brought them into services. They talk about how they've been prepared and for the role that they're taking up, because that's a vital part of involvement, is how you prepare people, because it's, as I say, quite a journey, and what difference they make. And then we always ask people to give us a challenge. What would you like the board to think about based on your experience? So they do that. I'm now going to use the magic of technology. Because it's technology, Alison, it's definitely going to work. Okay, so I'm going to, it'll appear on that, it'll appear on the screen up there. So this is so folks on online can see it as well.
Hello, I'll start. I'm Laura Downs. I'm a lived experience reviewer. My lived experience is from using Time to Talk, which I used following a near-death experience from following COVID, and went on to develop PTSD. I found the therapy excellent, really helped me through. Additionally, I'm also a carer for my disabled husband, who's a double amputee, and uses Oxleas services from time to time, for example, complex wound care, podiatry and so forth. And I'm also a nurse by background.
I'm Karina Glenn. I'm a lived experience reviewer. I've been using mental health services since a very young age. I have witnessed suicide. I also am a survivor of domestic violence, and in addition, I work with carers who have people in crisis.
Thank you. So I'm Olivia Ellis. I'm the Quality Training and Co-Production Facilitator for the Quality Management team, and I've been working on the Lived Experience Reviewer project for the last 18 months. So to start off with, Laura, tell us about your experience of being part of an Improving Lives peer review.
I'm quite new to being a peer reviewer, and I wasn't sure quite what to expect, but what I have found has been really interesting and so positive. The team were much more positive than I anticipated, given that the media are currently presenting the NHS very negatively. That is not what I experienced when interviewing nurses teams, in particularly in heart failure. And one thing I did find that in interviewing is that the training I received to be a peer reviewer really helped my understanding of the process involved and the need for the questions and the answers.
So I think being part of the Improving Lives peer review has been great. At first I was very, very anxious, and just everything they've done to sort of calm my nerves. I've only been on one so far, but I was able to shadow, thankfully, and that just made me feel very confident. So by mid-morning, I was able to sort of go into the waiting rooms and ask my own questions and felt a lot more relaxed. So the next time I'm going on, I'm gonna fly through. I'll be fine.
I genuinely feel, I feel this strongly, that as lived experience reviewers, we can impact a lot. Bearing in mind that we're also end users, carers, clients, patients. So we do give that experience, and we're at the end of the services that are being provided. So we have the empathy and we have the understanding, which is ultimately what we're all looking for, is good outcomes. And I think because of all that, because that we also might ask questions that will reflect that experience.
I feel that through my time actually receiving care, it was only when I actually came across somebody myself that I had lived experience that everything changed for me. Like everything changed. That's when I sort of like let my guards down and was able to open up completely, because I always felt that there was some sort of block. I felt that I was completely, everything I had to say was taken into consideration, and even a couple of times there was sort of like, oh yeah, good point. So I just really felt that I was important. And this was reflected too in the final report, because I noticed that some things that I'd said had been written down, so it's good.
So if you have one message you would like the board to take away from today, what would it be?
This wasn't difficult, really. Please don't negate the value of our experience. It's not all about data input. We bring reality concepts. We are again, I've said it before, but we're the end users of the provisions. We know the frustrations, we know the good, we know the not so good. But we might and can provide insight into criteria that hasn't been considered previously, when you're not looking at situations through our eyes and through our experience, which is very lived.
Very much the same. It's clear that co-production is key of all the work that we do in Oxleas, and it would be good if there was more roles available to continue the work going forward. I am told more and more often, we simply don't have the funding. We simply don't have the funding. If you simply just go on to this and that to sort of like see if there's job opportunities, which are far and few between, you know, then that may help. And I'm very aware of that my time is actually coming up. You know, I leave in July, and I've been at everything possible, every training thing you can think of possible. I've really searched for opportunities. They're there, but there's not enough of them. So yeah, there definitely needs to be more roles, I would say. Liv, from a quality perspective, why do you feel this role is crucial in the promotion of involvement?
This role has already started showing benefits from what we've heard from Laura and Karina. So I feel that by having the lived experience reviewers on each of the reviews in particular can start to increase involvement at team level and to promote co-production in other areas, not just within reviews, but in involvement projects like Laura's mentioned and other collaborative strategy work that's going on across the trust. This role has enabled us to include a huge variety of perspectives and experiences into our reports, improvements and feedback, and that helps us to ensure that the voices of the whole of the Oxleas community are heard.
So happy to take questions and comments, and I'm sure there's quite a lot in there.
Questions and comments for Neil?
That was a really interesting discussion. I think it's really good the fact that we've not seen it beforehand, so you're very much reacting to it on the day. So I had a couple of questions before we started, and then I did want to come back to the funding question, because I think that was one of the key asks really of the people that were being involved. The first one was just, we saw 3 female service users there. Can I just double check the gender makeup of the people that we're going to have coming along? The reason I'm asking is that we have got a range of kind of male, certainly on the mental health side, a little bit on the offender health side as well, obviously. There's more male, but also for the other protected characteristics, because I think they will bring a different nuance and perspective to those services. If I just do all the questions at once and then we can maybe look at it. That was really the main one that I had. Then in regards to the funding, I'm not sure that we're necessarily going to have a solution to that one, but I'm more than happy to have a discussion. But we are looking at very constrained times. But the third one was then on the staffing and how we can perhaps, because we will have worked very intensely with the people that are involved in the involved group, have we actually looked in regards to staffing, how we would be able to bring some of those opportunities through? Because we do have quite a lot of work that we're doing using training on the job, etc. And we certainly do have vacancies, I would say, at band 2 level that would then progress and go through with the relevant apprenticeship opportunities we would have. Sorry, that was quite a lot of questions, and it's probably not all for you to answer.
No, it's good. 3 questions, one of which is almost the answer to one of the others in a way, the money. So in terms of protected characteristics, just to clarify, that's 2 service users, and Liv is from our quality. So she's the interviewer, and they wanted to do the interview together. So I don't know offhand the mix, but I can find out because we're collecting a lot of information. That's one of our goals, is to try and make the involvement register as reflective of people using our services as much as possible. And that's for our strategy going forward. So we can certainly find that out. So it's worth thinking of involvement as being our kind of polytechnic or our kind of apprenticeship. It's not an end stage. It prepares people. And there is time limits. That role is time limited by NHS England, so they will give us 2 years of funding and all the rest. And the idea is that you build up these transferable skills, which is where we come to the point you're talking about. Now, Ian and I were chatting that this is a tension, so we're bringing in a new a pipeline of a workforce, and it is representative of our community, and we need conversations at a local level to kind of look at how roles can be, not repurposed, but opened in a way. So that's a piece of work. But you're right, it is a tension. So I don't think it's necessarily a question about money. I think it's more a question about the imagination. Would you say, Ian? I mean, it's because we just talked about this. So Involve is a polytechnic. It's an apprenticeship. It's not an end state. And actually, we need to bring new people in. So we need a time limit on that. It's more how services are thinking about those roles.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? Myself and Steve visited the mental health hub in Greenwich the other day, and there was a fantastic peer facilitator there that was doing a lot of work with the groups, and both from that individual's experience and actually what they were bringing to that team and how much of a valued member of that team it was. I think this is really about tying into our workforce strategy over the next 5 years and how we're over the next 3 years, because that's the period of the strategy, and how we're able to start building those up. But it would be useful to then also have those stories coming back to the people that are in the involved group, so they can see a pathway that is perhaps more individual based, because they're hearing stories of people that have done it.
Thank you, Asma. Rachel.
Thanks. So on the points that you raise, Azra, just to reassure you that the recruitment team are always on the lookout for roles that could be lived experience or peer sorts of roles that we could be putting in place. So we keep an eye out to see if those are opportunities. But our vision, I think, is that it's a pathway into all of the sorts of roles that we have in the organisation, rather than it is one dedicated kind of career pathway for lived experience practitioners. And I think that's I think it's taking a bit of a while for them to recognise that, but I think that actually opens up the whole organisation for their skills. I did want to note the power that she referred to about having her views captured and in the report, and it reminds me very much of the feedback we get from the shadow executive, for example, when they see in our minutes that their voice has really affected our decision making, and doing some Neil hosted a fantastic session that we had about experience-based co-design with staff who've experienced racism and how we can think differently about how we might create support and opportunities for people so that we can get our processes and support much better. And they came away blown away by the power of someone really listening to their experiences and really talking about it. And I think there is some real magic in, even if it's just the listening, but properly listening, both for us and for the people involved. And I think it's something we need to be doing more and more of as we evolve the strategy, because I keep seeing the massive impact that it has.
I think that's a really helpful point, perhaps even to finish on. It isn't just listening, it's the effect of the listening. And people really expect to see some effect from the thing they said. So seeing it appear, seeing change. We're no longer at thank you for telling us. We'll go on to the next item. It seems that's an expectation everywhere now, and I think that's how the field is developing.
No, thank you, and I think we've got some really helpful directions there for how we incorporate this into all of our paths as far as possible. And I agree, this closing the circle is really powerful. And I think if you could thank Laura and Karina on our part, it would be really helpful, and say that I think the attention the board gave shows that, we really did live forward. So thank you for that. Okay, moving on to our next item. It's the board assurance framework. We see this in depth twice a year. In other meetings, we see it more not superficially, but just looking at changes. And Iffy, you'll take us into the board assurance framework.
Thank you, Chair. So you're absolutely right. This is one of two occasions where we're going to go through the assurance framework in some detail. As you see, there are 14 risks, and we know that our board committees own these risks and would typically, as part of their meetings, review their own risks. So what I'd like to do is invite the committee chairs and the executive leads to perhaps just take us through the highlights or the key issues they want to draw the board's attention to based on the risks that their respective committees hold. And can I just urge colleagues to please go in the order in which it appears in the paper? So business and infrastructure, quality, and then people.
Shall I make some brief introductory comments, then Azra, perhaps you can pick up in more depth. So you can see here in the cover sheet the BAF risks from business and infrastructure. If I sort of just give a sort of pencil portrait on each one. So the ICS capital regime, we currently rate that moderate. I think our concern here is more longer term. I think if we look at the plans for next year, which are more or less finalised, I think that gives us what we need. But we know that capital is going to be tight going forward, and that presents quite a few issues, even from some of the more strategic things we want to do to renewing the IT infrastructure, for example. So issues on the horizon, or potential issues on the horizon, but next year, okay. The next one will be closed shortly, so that's the in-year risk for financial delivery. So good news, it will be closed shortly and it's currently rated low. Bad news is we'll open a new one for the now current year, 24-25, and that will start at a rating that's higher than low. But and we'll come on to some financial planning in part 2. The bigger picture financial sustainability is the next one, which is rated significant. We have a huge hill to climb in terms of SIPs in the current year to get us in a good place going forward, and that is of concern across the trust and how we move through on that, with a number of the key programs that we know about, for example, bed usage being absolutely key to that. Briefly, the Bexley PFI risk, that's rated significant. There's potentially significant amounts of money involved in this. We're looking potentially at breaking the PFI contracts, as you can see, in 2028, which in many ways feels a long way ahead. But at the speed at which PFI negotiations proceed, will be gone in the blink of an eye. So I think we are in a much better state, and thanks to Rachel and Azra and their teams, in terms of understanding where we are. And I think we've had an independent view that we're in a much better situation. But the process and dealing with the various parties involved is complex. And as I said, some significant money. Cyber is rated high. I think if you went to nearly every organisation, you would see cyber on the risk register. We continue to do things to improve our risk profile, and in general, Oxleas comes out pretty well when we had various internal audits and such like, but this is an environment where the risk isn't staying the same, and we're trying to bring our defences up to meet it. The risk on cyber, as you all know, is just increasing everywhere. So it's an antagonistic risk environment. And then the final one, achieving carbon zero. I think we're doing some really good stuff on this. The bigger picture, things coming downstream lack funding at the moment. So, fundamentally decarbonising heating. And there's a clever route through, which hopefully means you don't move too quickly, because the view is that technology will make the cost of doing this cheaper in the future. But, there are some big changes to make. But in the meantime, we're doing well, and I think organising ourselves well. And just finally to say, we've had a risk on business infrastructure, which we didn't escalate to the BAF, but I think we provided some information to the board last time we spoke about risk regarding the financial situation in Southwest prisons. I think that has moved forward, and we've seen a plan now, business and infrastructure, subject to a couple of QIAs that would close that gap. Some of the things will definitely help. Other things are more plans to close the gap. So at the moment, the Business and Infrastructure Committee is content not to escalate that to the BAF, but we will be keeping it under review with at the moment, we'll have another review in a quarter's time to see how the first quarter of 24-25 has gone, and whether the plans to close that gap are moving in the right direction. So that's all I was going to say. And Azra, you can perhaps pick up any detail on that and tell me where I got things slightly wrong.
I would never say that, Joe. And I think you gave a really good summary of those key risks. So I think the only things I would point out is when we come to discussing the 24-25 plan this afternoon, that has moved on from where the papers are. So I will give an update on that. I do think that is going to be a bit of a movable feast as we go through next year. And as we experienced last year, we will continue to put in a break-even plan. But that may progress during the course of the year, and that will be partly dependent on the financial position of the other NHS organisations within the ICS. So we will continue to keep an eye on that. I think the ICS capital regime, just reflecting on what Joe was saying, we have got a couple of really major pinch points, certainly coming across this year and the year after. So 25-26 is looking like the most challenged year on capital for the ICS as a whole. And because we've now had to move the mechanism where we were if we had the cash, we could spend whatever we wanted, into now operating within a South East London capital envelope, that is going to require really key negotiation in terms of the mitigation that we have going forward. So the firmer the plan that we have going forward, the better. And we're going to have to land that with a set of strategic objectives across South East London. So it's just marking that, because I do think that is going to become more challenged. And it also internally, we are beginning to see a point that we're needing to refresh some of the IT elements of our capital programme, because we really significantly increased the amount of laptops, etc., as we went into the COVID period. And therefore, all of those are now due for a degree of refreshing. So we've got a challenge internally of the shape between estates and digital that we've got in a quite small operational sum. And that is then exacerbated by the South East London ICS position and other NHS organisations' requirements. So that we will have to keep an eye on that. I wasn't going to say anything further on the Bexley PFI unless there was anything that Rachel wanted to add. No. And then I think cyber we're well aware of, so I wasn't really going to add anything further into that, or the carbon zero, but I'm happy to take questions from the board.
Thanks, Azza. Just a really quick question. If it's not commercially sensitive, do we have a quantum for the PFI risk?
I'm going to say that is commercially sensitive.
Can I ask, in terms of the plans that you quite rightly highlighted for next year and being sharp about what we want out of them and how that fits in, what's the sort of timeline that we need to have our asks ready for those negotiations next year? What do you think that's going to be in the ICS?
So I think we've already started on that process. The issue that we've had within South East London is because the revenue position has been so severely challenged over the course of last year, virtually all of the discussions were revenue. Now, we as a group of CFOs and DOFs have said we must get capital onto the table because the risk of not having that South East London strategic discussion, I think we're in a fairly good position in terms of the 5-year plan. Probably the biggest challenge that we've got is in regards to the really big ask that we would have if we were going to do a re-provision of our wards, because that is now looking at a time and a price tag, given some of the inflation aspects that we've had across the building industry, that is probably going to require us to do a proper plan to NHSE rather than something that we could manage within the strategic capital ask in South East London. So we will need to progress that OBC, I think, if we're wanting to do a pitching on that element. But B, we need to have a proper strategic discussion within South East London. We need to find the time within the CEO and the CFO meetings to be able to push that forward. I know that there's quite a bit of work that's happening within the estates arena in regards to that, and I'm assuming, Alison, that that is also replicated with digital service directors in terms of an overarching strategy. What I could say is, compared to what organisations want to the envelope that we've got available, it is somewhere in the region of 3 times oversubscribed. So that's a real challenge about how we manage that process. I don't know if colleagues wanted to add anything on that. Hopefully. Yes, and we have flagged in the internal papers of the, you know, the more confidential papers of the ICS, what we think that's going to look like.
Thank you, Steve.
And just to give some additional context to that, if you look at the structure of the NHS buildings, which is 50% pre-1948, there's a shortfall for each ICS. Each of the ICSs of about 175 million. And across the organisation, these are government figures, 7 billion. So you play that into the figures that Ezra was talking about. So that would just be maintenance and improving facilities up to where they should be without even going in onto improvement of buildings. It's actually quite scary.
I think capital is something we're really going to have to keep an eye on in the next year or so, because you're right, it's going to be one of the major pinch points that we have in what we want to do, and we're going to have to find ways of making our arguments appropriately in an appropriate manner, but also other ways of trying to see what we can do around this. Yes, sorry, Rachel.
Just linking that to the other risk around climate change and net zero. Obviously, that is a significant pressure. I don't think any of us, across the NHS or nationally, or the world indeed, are going to deliver that aspiration unless there's investment. And at the moment, we've had to make some very difficult decisions about not proceeding these projects because we just don't have the resource to do it. So unless there's additional resource comes to make that possible, then that risk is likely to stay very high for a very long time.
Thank you. And I think that needs to be fed into the capital discussions, doesn't it? Okay.
Suzanne.
Thank you. So I think all of the risks which the Quality Committee are holding will be familiar to members of the board. Taking the first one, the bed management plan, or the bed management risk. This is monitored very closely through both the Quality Committee and the Finance Committee. The risk as it's currently formulated, I think, gives a very good description of what the issues are. And I understand that that is partly owing to some of the input from service users who helped us to understand a bit more about how this risk impacts on them. So I think the best thing way to put this is that it's still early days in terms of the bed recovery programme. There are some small green shoots which we hope can be nurtured through spring into the summer. The South West Prison service quality, I think the possibility of reducing this risk reflects an enormous amount of work which has taken place, both by the executive but also from people in the Southwest. And it's clear that recruitment, some of the quality improvement work that's been going on and the enhancement of governance processes has enabled us to say that we can reduce this risk, but it's still one that we will be keeping an eye on. And I think that people will recognise that with prisons, it sometimes feels a bit like one step forward, two steps forward and one step back. I think that we would recognise that the challenges to some extent within the prisons lie with us, but also within the staffing of the prisons by HMIP. So the some of the issues we can tackle and lie within our scope to address, others less so. But I think we would want to recognise that real progress has been made here by some extremely hard work. And the last one, the pressure on the district nursing teams. I was trying to remember whether there's any point at which I've been a NED when this hasn't been on the BAF. I have a vague feeling that I can remember it coming onto the BAF in the early days when I was a NED. I think Jane very aptly described district nursing recently as being like the emergency department for the community. You know, you can't say to people, no, we're not going to see you. You have to deal with the demand, and the demand has been relentlessly rising. It may be that the executive might like to say a bit more about the discussion with place colleagues, or it might be something that Jane would want to comment on. But you know, this is an ongoing issue and not one that's going to be resolved in the near future.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to what Suzanne has said, I think there are definite indications of that our bed recovery programme is taking us in the right direction, and I'll elaborate more on that at the when I do the operational report. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to reduce the risk during the course of this financial year from significant to at least high. But I think that's something that I'd want to review probably around Q3. In terms of Southwest Prisons, I think Suzanne's nicely captured where we are. You'll have seen from the BAF that there are 2 prisons where we have residual concerns. I think the kind of underlying reasons for why they've been highlighted are slightly different. Elstoke, I feel confident that we will kind of move that the kind of risk rating down, and a lot of that is to do with its geographical setting and the impact that has on staffing and recruitment, but also changes to the prison population itself. HMP Bristol, which I think colleagues who've been on the board for a while will know is one of our remand prisons, and has been subject to an action plan from HMIP as well as CQC. It remains one of our most, if not our most challenging environment. In terms of our response to that action plan, we've now completed all of our actions. So just picking up what Suzanne was saying, a large part of the kind of challenge of operating in that prison is to do with the prison itself and the context. Our other remand prison in the southwest, though, Exeter, was in a similar situation not so long ago, and that has moved on. So again, I think there's indications that that will move in the right direction. I did just want to kind of highlight that because I think it's in the pack, that we may need to either rewrite this risk or open a new risk, which is related to service delivery. So we are in ongoing conversations with NHSE in that region, which relating to the kind of the financial envelope that's available to us. And we are in a position where we are now having to take action to look at what we have been currently delivering and how that may need to be adjusted in the future. So that's an active conversation. We're looking at it region by region, starting with Devon, and that's a conversation we're taking forward with NHSE and the local prison group directors. So just wanted to highlight that is something that we will revisit, certainly as an exec and then as a quality committee. And then in terms of pressure on district nursing teams, I mean, yeah, I think you're right, Suzanne. It's always been there. It's certainly been there since I've been coup, because I put it on there. I think you'll see that we are considering whether this needs to become a business as usual risk. When it went on the BAF, it went on at the same time as a risk around demand and capacity in community mental health. We've moved that back to business as usual. So I think there's a question for us about whether we need to kind of rethink our approach to it. Just to say, around those discussions with Place, there has been some progress since we last reviewed the risk at the Quality Committee. So certainly in Bexley, through discussions with Place colleagues, we've closed the gap on the finances. It's not quite where it needs to be, but it's much better than it was. And they have undertaken to work. So Diana Braithwaite is the new PEL, has said she wants to work with Sarah Birchall, our service director, to do a proper kind of systematic review of district nursing in the borough, taking on board that we need to collectively think about this as a problem. And then in Greenwich, we are still having that conversation about the financial gap, but it's not as stark as it is in Bexley.
Thank you. Asma.
So just to add on to that district nursing, the solution that we've got in Bexley is non-recurrent in part while we're awaiting that review. So I don't think that would disappear off as an issue. So we are actively reviewing that. Ian and I were at the strategic finance meeting for community physical, and we've tried to see, clearly we're not absolutely in charge of the timeline, but if they could try and resolve the solution that they're thinking within Bexley in those reviews by the end of Q2, that will allow us to then enter the contracting period for the following year in a better position with all of the suitable information at hand.
Thank you. I must admit, as somebody outsider coming in, the district nursing flagged to me on their one because it seemed like it was a long-standing risk, and while there are perennial risks like finance that frankly will always be on there in some form or the other, that feels to me that we should either find a solution or move it into business as usual or whatever. It shouldn't be such a long-going risk, but it sounds as though we've got things in plan. Other questions? Any other questions on this one? No? People?
Of time. I don't think anyone will be surprised to see the risks that remain on the BAF from a people committee perspective, and Rachel will talk through those at a high level. The two comments that I would make, Andrew, for your benefit are we have historically challenged conventional thinking around how we approach vacancies and recruitment pressures with some of the initiatives that we've undertaken, and likewise on discrimination and abuse at work and staff experiencing violence, aggression or abuse. We can talk to you at a later point around some of the work around Operation Cavell. Yeah. But the thinking in a lot of trusts, particularly mental health trusts, is it's almost a badge of honour and to you get to a particular level of seniority. And we've been very proactive in the work that we've done. Clearly, we are still carrying the risk. There is still a way to go, but those are just comments by way of introduction.
Thank you.
Thanks. So in terms of the vacancy and recruitment pressures risk, on the one hand, we're making really good progress. So if you look back this time last year, our vacancy rates were 3% higher than they are now. So you might think that that would feel very different. The difficulty is that there are really still significant hotspots in particular areas and particular professions, which means that for some areas they're not going to be feeling the benefits of that, even though we are making progress. So our approach generally is to seize every opportunity to raise the profile of Oxleas as an employer. We work hard to keep going on our retention because we just don't want to lose people. And one of the things that we're doing is we've got some funding from NHS England for a retention manager, and we're focusing on induction. We want to make sure we lose fewer people in the first year, because all that effort to bring them in and then to lose them is such a shame. We want to be doing more around career development, because we know that people come here to develop their careers. And so having really good conversations with managers, there being programmes of work to support people to reach their potential, we think is really important. And we're also improving pipelines. So we've got a successful graduate scheme. We've also now got 175 apprenticeships. So if you think that 3 or 4 years ago, I think we had 25 apprenticeships, that's something that's really, really grown. So we are making good progress, but I don't know if there will ever be a time when staffing isn't going to be a challenge for us as an organisation, so we can't take our eye off the ball. In terms of discrimination and abuse at work, again, there are significant improvements. So if you look at our staff survey results, they show really quite significant improvement in this space, but we still lag behind the sector. So there is still more that we can be doing. If you look at representation, year on year, we narrow the underrepresentation gap from a race perspective, and things are moving forward. And there's a lot of innovation and excitement within the organisation about some new initiatives that we've got in place, including our Smashing It programme around career development. But if we don't keep making this programme of work bigger and bigger and bigger every year, it will slip back. We are making progress, but we will only continue to do so if we really commit to it. Violence abuse, Jane leads the committee on this. Again, showing lots of improvements and better than the sector. But what we know is the real impact that this has on our staff's lives. So I don't think we'll ever want to underestimate what it feels like to be subject to an incident of violence and abuse. But work around relational security, really highlight the work that NIDU is doing in the acute and crisis area, things that we're doing around having proactive directorate leads that check the support packages that are in place, that we're really there for people. All those things are making a difference, but there is much more that we want to do. Jane, I don't know if there's anything you want to add from a violence and abuse.
Thank you, Rachel. I think the main thing I'd add, having had some recent focus groups with some of our staff mainly affected, so our lower banded staff on the inpatient wards, is that we really need to think about how we're getting our packages of support and support at various points in time for people right, and that's going to be the focus for us going forward now.
Abby isn't here to speak about industrial action, but I know it's going to be covered in your chief executive report, Iffy, so I won't speak to that. But we do know that people are having their appointments cancelled, and we're doing our very best in terms of extra clinics to manage it. But it will continue to be a real drain and a real pressure for us as an organisation. And finally, the experience of staff in our expanded prisons. So based on the staff survey, it's clear that offender, healthcare and prisons directorates do have one of the worst experiences across the organisation in terms of staff. South West isn't actually any worse than elsewhere. It's not as bad as we feared it would be in terms of the staff survey results, but qualitatively, we do know that people have had a tough time there over the last few years, and it's really important that people have this sense of there being one Oxleas. So as things like as we arrange our Trust of the Year celebrations, it's really important to us that South West and other prison settings don't feel like an afterthought, and that they are right at the heart of our thinking. That's all I was going to say. Thanks.
Next item.
Yes.
Right, thank you, Chair. So, in the interest of time, I'm just going. All I want to do is just highlight a few things from my report. Rachel has already mentioned the industrial action. All I can say, particularly with respect to the dispute that the BMA have written to NHSEO about, I just pray and hope that doesn't result in industrial action, because I think that will be absolutely catastrophic for the NHS. Just to draw attention to the CAS review, you'll see that our partners in Southeast London, namely SLAM and Evelina Hospital, are now involved in the gender identity services that's been set up since the Tavistock and Portman service was closed. There will be an impact for us in Oxleas, particularly with the expectation that we assess, treat and support under 18-year-olds who have been on the waiting list for a long time. What we don't know yet is how many of those will come to our children and young persons services. I wanted to draw attention to the CQC community mental health result, which kind of came in, slipped in under the radar. It wasn't announced broadly or anything at all. It is pleasing to see that we did better than many other organizations in two domains: crisis support and opportunities to give feedback. However, as the CQC themselves reported, community mental health services provided are poor right across the board. And they talked about poor quality of care, poor crisis care, poor support whilst people are waiting on account of long waiting lists, people reporting that they're not involved in planning and involvement, and lack of support in other areas of their lives. We've always tried in Oxleas to put the outcomes in perspective, because this is 265 people out of 23,000 people that we look after in our community mental health teams, according to Lorraine's presentation the last time at our strategic board. So it's about 1%. That's the feedback that's been received. But also, as a trust, this is an even smaller proportion, given that many of our patients come from community fiscal health. That said, this is the only data that the CQC have got about feedback from people who use services, and so we must pay attention to it. And I think that it is worthy of further examination, and Neil and I have talked about the need to triangulate this with the data we hold internally, see what we could do differently. But I also think that the deployment of Dialogue Plus across our community services, and for colleagues who don't know what that is, it's essentially 11 questions across 8 live domains, things like where people who use services are asked to comment on how satisfied they are with their housing, their benefits, employment, leisure activities, etc. That deploying that and helping our staff feel more confident, because Muniza and I visited a team last week, and what we heard from some clinicians was that it would appear as though our staff feel as if they will be responsible for helping people with housing, etc. But what Dialogue Plus intends to do is to draw on the resources that individuals have to help them, or for us to signpost where they don't have those resources. So I would hope that the more we deploy Dialogue, the more we use it, that users of services will begin to see what support we're giving them, not just with their mental health necessarily, but also all of those other things that we know are important. There are quite a number of other things in my report, but I just want to draw attention to two. One, which I must mention, or else my digital director won't be happy, that we have EMEDS has been shortlisted. We hope that we will go to Manchester in a couple of months, and that we will win that award. And then I also want to draw attention to the graduate scheme, which has already been mentioned. Really impressive in the third year. And I hope that I'll be able to bring to the board the analysis that's currently being undertaken about its impact. Happy to take questions. And I'll
The questions, I think after this, we'll just touch on something. We'll then break for coffee after this, just so people are aware. Manisa.
For the CQC sample, do we have any indication as to how representative that cohort might be of the patients as a whole? Were they from a particular service, a particular site? Or?
So I really don't know, if I'm honest, but sorry, I really don't know how representative it is. Our experience over the years has always been that it's not that representative, you know, and again, it depends on people who, when invited, respond. I really don't want to make light of it, but 1% is really tiny of people who are on our lists.
Joe?
Thank you. It was just about the graduate programme, and I suspect this question is premature, but I'd be interested now, because we're in our third year now, just about to start our third year, how many of the original intake of graduates stay through the programme and are progressing to roles in Oxleas? But it may well be that you're going to bring a report back at some point to explain, or to go to People Committee, just that, I guess.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. That's part of the assessment that's going on now. Feedback from those who've used it, what proportion have joined services, etc.
I just wanted to come back to the community mental health survey. We did have a brief discussion about this at not the last. I'm just trying to remember which quality committee it was. I think it was one before last when the survey came out. And we've asked Neil to come back to a future committee with a response from directorates to what they understand they may have learned from the survey. I think it's inappropriate to dismiss it on the basis that it has a low response rate. Our own feedback has a fairly low response rate. It's always difficult getting good response rate for patient feedback, particularly within the context of community care. So I think that we need to take this seriously. And what I would hope is that the teams involved would be able to have a discussion about what is being suggested for the community mental health survey, and to recognise that there are issues in there that we do need to take on board and take seriously. So I would hope that the approach to the survey wouldn't be to dismiss it as data that aren't helpful, but to take on board that this is feedback from patients in our services, and they haven't had as good care as we would want. And it's part of our commitment to do the best that we can by those patients.
So where will the response to that community survey come, Effie? What's the...
Neil, do you want to?
So we were discussing this at the patient experience group, and so it'll come through patient experience, then come to the June quality board.
Thank you.
Ify, I know we've talked about this before in the context of the junior doctor strike. We had discussed at a recent board meeting how we walk the line between supporting junior doctors in their right to strike, while still staying true to our duty of care to patients. And I know we're still awaiting data on harm from NHSEI. Feels like we've been awaiting that data for a really long time. Presumably, so I don't view it as a risk because I think it's crystallized, but presumably the fact that the senior doctors, the consultants have accepted the pay offer reduces the impact of further junior doctor strikes, but what's our position as a trust, and what is it that we ought to be doing in terms of duty of care to patients? What practically can we do on that front?
Let me just comment and then I'll invite you in. So I'm not sure that we are confident of how juniors will respond, given that the seniors have accepted what's on offer. But you're absolutely right, and this has been our approach all along, that we will support juniors because it's their right, and we will not put them under pressure not to strike, nor would we ask if they intend to. But at the same time, we recognize that when they do strike, it has had a real impact. So we've been quite fortunate in having other grades of doctors. And so whenever juniors have striked, we've been able to ensure that the level of disruption is minimal. But of course, it's the number of strikes that has now resulted in us not being able to assure anybody that people have not been doubly or trebly affected. And we haven't heard for certain when a date will be. And so we'll continue to make efforts. I mean, your comment about us not hearing of any harms doesn't surprise me, because a lot of our time in the last, 2 months or so in the NHS has been entirely preoccupied with money and planning, etc., which often dominates the discussion. But I hope that we'll get some news from NHS England in that regard. But I think, Ian, you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, it was just to kind of reiterate how we approached managing it during the different rounds of industrial action. So I did work closely with Abby around what our response was going to be. So I think certainly to begin with, we were able to actually work, minimize the disruption. So there were very few clinics closed. I think that became more difficult as time went on. We did try and ensure that patients weren't subject to repeated cancellations, and that I don't have the kind of exact numbers, but that was certainly the case for the majority of patients' experience. But certainly by the time we got to the last round, it was becoming more difficult to ensure that. So there was certainly some people who had been subject to repeat cancellations, but still comparatively small numbers. And the knowledge of who those people are is very much held at directorate level. So clinical directors will be aware of that, and they would have then tried to do kind of catch up and make sure that those people were prioritised. But yeah, it was just to kind of offer some reassurance that we have got an idea of the scale of the impact. But yeah, I mean, if it's helpful, I'm sure we can bring detail back at some point. Yeah.
So perhaps we could have that at the next board. That would be helpful. Okay.
Julie's just reminded me, really keen that we mentioned this, that during the industrial action, we've had some really significant advanced clinical practitioner nurses supporting. Many of them have now gone on to further their careers, particularly Pratab and John. I'd like to thank them for their input.
Thank you. It's very much appreciated. Any other questions for Iffy? In that case, before we break, can we just go backwards to the chair's report, which, as this is my second day, probably should be relatively brief. But just say I did attend the Cavendish Square Group actually with Iffy to meet Chris Hobson, who's the Chief Strategy Director, I think, for NHS England. Chance to emphasise the importance of mental health, but also, perhaps more importantly, say something about how the sector is actually responding to the challenges and working with the systems. I think that's a message that we need to get across, and that was helpful. And as I've already reported yesterday, I had a very good first day here, visiting Oxleas House and Green Parks as well. And I have a week of induction meeting, trying to get to every site, every major bedded site, certainly, by the end of the week. So Thank you, everybody. I think, unless there are any questions for me about my first day, I suggest that we break for coffee and a leg stretch, and we meet again at 1:45. So it's about 10 minutes to stretch, and then we will start off with the operational report from Ian. Thank you. Back in the second half of part one of the agenda, and we'll go through to lunch on this one, and my sort of estimate is that we should be about an hour now to lunch, give or take, just to allow people. We're going to start off with the operational report. Oh, no, we're not. In that case, can we jump ahead while things are being dealt with elsewhere? And we have the we're going to jump, Sally, ahead of operational report to the board visit reports. Sorry, I'm not at the right page of my screen. Can somebody help me out who's got the first? Thank you. I've gone too far there. Ian is back. Ian, are you happy to take into the hot seat and go straight to the operational report?
Yes, apologies about that.
There we go.
Yeah, let me just fire up my computer. Great, thank you, Chair. Sorry for the delay. This month I thought it'd be helpful to highlight the progress we're making around the bed recovery programme, which we alluded to when we talked through the BAF risks. And then I just have drawn out a few key things from each of the directorates, and the detail, a more detailed report for each directorate you will have seen in the reading room. As we said before, there's some really positive indications that things are moving in the right direction in terms of getting on top of demand and capacity for our adult mental health beds. The data that we looked at for March really suggested that, and our experience over the last 4 or 5 weeks has kind of reinforced the fact that things are really going in the right direction. So I think a number of colleagues will be familiar with the kind of 3 elements of the programme: purposeful admission, flow and discharge processes, and an element of community transformation, particularly linked with people who have been previously subject to kind of fairly regular informal admissions. So I'm really pleased to say that what this has resulted in is a significant reduction in the number of out-of-area beds that we're using. As of the beginning of this week, the total number of out-of-area beds, private beds, was 17, and that included PICU. The length of stay has started to reduce. So we've had a kind of fairly significant number of people, a kind of legacy group of long stayers, and they are starting to come down. And we're really trying to, as people come into hospital, through the work we're doing around estimated date of discharge, to try and drive a shorter length of stay for new admissions. Starting off working within a kind of 45-day period, but with the aim of reducing that to 30 days as an average over time. And to drive that, we've implemented 2 new meetings each week. One is the Purple Track meeting, which is for that long stayer group, and that's being overseen by Fareed Jabbar, who's also our flow director, as well as being deputy medical director, and then the Green Track meeting that I'm currently chairing. And I think that's really helpful kind of evidence of how the underlying work that has been taken forward on kind of culture and organisational development is embedding. So we're able to, as well as kind of tackle specific issues, really kind of draw out themes. So just to say that admissions are, there's lots of focus on length of stay, but alongside that, admissions are now consistently a little under 80 per month. And actually, probably since the last time I looked at that data, that's probably reduced further. We've seen a significant reduction of admissions in April as well. And really importantly, we're proportionally seeing fewer admissions through ED, which I think is down to the fact that the teams are working really hard across the acute and community interface to explore alternative pathways. And that, of course, means there's a considerable reduction in the number of patients waiting for a bed in ED, and therefore very few breaches of the waiting time standard. So I think our contribution to kind of system pressures is really noticeable. And I'm pretty clear that for the last 2 or 3 weeks, every day we've had either 0 or 1 person waiting. And usually that's for admission. It's not for for assessment rather than admission. So that feels like quite a big shift, really. Alongside that, we continue to see a reduction in conveyances for people from the BBG footprint into our health-based place of safety over the last 5 weeks. And any breaches we do see in health-based place of safety are pretty much consistently linked to the patients being patients of other providers. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that alongside this work to kind of improve process, and there's a kind of conversation starting around the capacity we have in-house, so the number of beds we have in-house. So previously we've talked about the kind of balance of working age versus older people's mental health beds. Aisling Clifford, the service director, has now started a conversation within the directorate to look at the possibility of reducing our older people's mental health beds and converting those to working age. And there's some really compelling data that she shared with the directorate last week, and she's working closely with the clinical director to kind of get that clinical buy-in to that approach. So this feels a good piece of work. Obviously, it's still comparatively early days, but it's probably the best. It feels like the best position we've been in for a number of years, actually. So I thought it was good to start off with that story. In terms of just picking out what's in the report, just wanted to highlight in community mental health the work that has been undertaken to reduce demand on ADAPT. It's very much linked to the work of the mental health hubs, which Lorraine presented on last month's strategic board. We are now successfully providing lower level interventions for people at the hub and working with the rest of the system to divert need to more appropriate sources of help. And that means that those people who are coming into ADAPT, there's kind of very clear treatment goals. It's enabled the team to really kind of work on its purpose and come up with a revised model. And really importantly, it means a manageable caseload, which helps in those achieving those treatment aims. And then if you link that into our kind of performance exceptions, what will hopefully happen over time is then a reduction in RTT for psychological therapies, because for adult mental health, most of our psychological therapies are delivered through that pathway. So again, something to be optimistic about. Similarly in CYP, trying to get on top of demand and capacity in our CAM services continues. There's been a lot of focus on a kind of Southeast London level around reducing waits for assessment. They continue to come down, although I think for some pathways they're still a little away from where we would like them to be. But behind that, we're now starting to try and look at delays further down the pathway for treatment. So again, I'm hopeful in this year we will start to see an improvement around RTT for psychological therapies in particular. Couple of other things. ALD, colleagues will have noted the closure of Atlas House. This is a success story, I think, in terms of how we are managing and the needs of this particular population. But it's also it's a kind of sad story as well, because I think Atlas House has been very much part of the kind of Oxleas family for a very long time. And there's been some amazing work done there over the years. So the party to celebrate its closure was a slightly bittersweet affair, but it was very nicely marked. And likewise, some really good examples in community physical health of QI. Again, I've said this before, I think as a directorate, they're really great actually in terms of continuing to innovate and kind of take new things forward, whilst also managing huge demands on their services. So I think should be celebrated. And then last but not least, forensics and offender healthcare. As colleagues know, Lawrence retired as service director last week, and I'm very pleased to be working closely with the directorate, and I will continue to do so until we appoint a new director. There are a number of challenges that they're experiencing, particularly over at the Bracton Centre. We've talked before about the culture work. We are expecting a report from the consultants imminently, but in the meantime, the team are working to kind of manage things like rosters, and also to address, take things forward with individual members of staff around conduct and behaviour. And there continues to be concerns around substances coming into the unit. So I'm working with the directorate to review both environmental security but also relational security, and starting a conversation with Jane around how we support a kind of more treatment focus on substance misuse within the service. So that was my highlights. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Iffy.
Thank you, Ian. Mine isn't a question, just to bring different perspectives to two or three things that you've mentioned. So the first is the work that Ian has talked about with respect to flow in ED. Last week at a regional meeting with NHS region, the chief exec of LGT did actually applaud Oxleas on the work we've been doing, and commented that in the last few weeks, they've noticed that our patients don't sit in ED, and that has improved their ED metrics. And so I think that was really very good. The second is also on the work that Ian touched on about adult community mental health, and in particular, how the hubs are helping reduce activity. This also came up at a subsequent meeting on the same day, looking at mental health. And on account of sharing that at the group, the mental health leads for the London region have been in touch, wanting to visit, and I'll put them in touch with Lorraine, because they want to visit to understand and hear more about the work that the hubs we have in Oxleas are doing, and how that's really helping manage demand in a proactive way, but also stemming more activity in secondary mental health. And then yesterday, as Andrew has said, we visited the liaison team, and of course that team does a great deal of work in terms of ensuring that admissions to hospital are purposeful, and it was really eye-opening to hear of the pressure they feel making those decisions, and the need to be supported as a trust broadly, but also in terms of making those decisions. And so I kind of just want to thank them, as we did yesterday, that we have felt the benefits as an organization, and I will definitely give them every support that they need. And I intend to go back again to just reassure them that we are grateful for what they do.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Ian? Yes.
Thanks, Ian. Two questions. Number one is about health-based place of safety. I can see there's less of BBG coming to that space now, but we've seen over the last 2-3 months, we've got lots of other people from other regions coming in. What's the driver behind that? Is there a reason? Second question, very quickly, Bracton. The issue with substance misuse, is that linked to the other Bracton issue, do you think, or are they quite separate?
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, very good questions. So in terms of how the changes to the pattern of kind of referrals to health-based place of safety, is very much linked to the two 136 hubs that have been created in London. So they came into effect beginning of November, one in South London, one in North London. South London one is operated by the South London Partnership, hosted by SLAM. And what that having those resources, it means that the police can contact them. They have a bird's eye view of where the capacity is in the capital, and they divert the police to where the kind of where the gap, the vacancy is. I mean, the good news is certainly initially that reduced conveyances to ED. Interestingly, across London, it seems that may have kind of crept back up again, although we're not seeing it in our two local EDs. So, of course, if beds were available under compact, we should endeavour to admit people locally, even if they're not our patients. But that's very rarely the case. So we're then reliant on the other trusts kind of moving their patients into their beds as quickly as possible. And because of our geography, a lot of those conveyances are from other parts of southeast London, and we know at the moment that SLAM are experiencing considerable challenges on their beds. In terms of the second question, I don't think there's a sense that they are the culture issues and the substance misuse issues are linked. This is about, we've got one particular area of vulnerability, which is Birchwood, which is our kind of rehab unit where people are getting ready for release, for discharge. So their movements, they have kind of greater movement than other wards. So that's been a kind of a particular source of concern. There's a conversation I need to have with Rachel just around particular parts of the fencing which may need to be reviewed. And I think the other area is just working with families and carers. Often they are the source of how things get in as well. So it's a delicate piece of work, obviously, but yeah.
Thank you, Neil.
I just wanted to underline something about the changes to the ADAPT services, which might seem a little bit technical, but this is a real achievement. These are particularly services for people diagnosed with personality disorder, complex emotional needs, a very large, significant population, usually very underserved and poorly served. So looking at the changes they've made, and I'm involved in many of the national forums, I can offer assurance this is absolutely at the top of best practice, the thing that they've achieved there. And I think whilst we talk many times about inpatient services, that I think needs really underscoring because that is a real achievement. And just myself benchmarking it nationally, I think well done to the teams.
Thank you. Suzanne. Oh, sorry. Yes, sir. Muneza.
On Bracton, do we have a sense of whether this issue is sort of new or whether it has been continuing for a while and is being uncovered because we're looking at Bracton more closely?
In terms of substances, I think the scale of it is new. And it's emerged at the end of last year, the beginning of this year. I mean, to the extent that there was a period of time, a month or so ago, where we actually, in a sense, locked the Bracton down. So we stopped leave and we restricted visiting. In my experience, that's fairly unique. Actually, I can't think of another time when we've done that. So I think it is an indication that things, for whatever reason, things have changed. But I think it's that point I was trying to make. I think we can respond to it, or from a kind of security point of view. I think we need to now get on top of the fact that, you know, we're working with a client group that are with us for quite some time, and a bit like our prison population, there is a possibility that you know, substances will be used, and I think we need to be much more proactive about our kind of treatment and support that we give people.
I just check in as well. There's something about the nature of substance abuse which makes it very, very difficult for it to be caught as well, in terms of how it's able to be brought into the setting. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, a bit like prison, there are creative ways of bringing certain substances in. So I know from speaking to Finanzai, who's the head of nursing, that again, like prisons, spice is one of the kind of highest use substances that can be kind of brought in on paper. So it's very easy to discuss, and clothing, yeah, as well. Other substances, you know, we can pick up. I mean, we're always kind of reviewing the security. I mean, in terms of kind of searches, we do conduct searches. When it comes to visitors, there are kind of limits to the searches that we can undertake. But I think there is something about just being very clear in our messaging about these things. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just wanted to commend that approach, the proactive approach to tackling substance misuse. Really welcome that. My question was about CAMS. I also wanted to commend the work on the waiting lists for CAMS. It's great to see that it's going down, but it was in connection with the CAS review and the gender identity service. Do we have any idea when that is going to take effect and the impact that that will have on Oxleas? It has been mentioned previously, but I wondered if we had any indication of timeframes and how we're planning for it.
Thanks, Sophie. I mean, there isn't any further news on that I've got, kind of following on from the discussion we had at the last strategic board. So I don't have a sense of the numbers as yet, or when those referrals are going to start coming in. But obviously, as soon as I do, I will kind of report that back through the quality committee.
Thank you, Suzanne.
I just wanted to come back to the bed management project process. I think that one of the really good things about this is that it combines the virtue of using our resources efficiently and effectively together with better care for patients, because I think a purposeful admission is much more constructive admission than just finding yourself somewhere and kicking around there for indeterminate periods. The thing that I wanted to ask about is the discharge process and the place that the home treatment teams are then occupying, because they're potentially, you know, they're an important link in the chain and potentially a weak link. And I think we did used to see data on the extent to which they were able to meet the requirement of seeing patients within 72 hours of discharge, which we don't see in the same way anymore. But presumably we're still monitoring that. And I just wanted to seek assurance that within this overall process, the post-discharge support that people are getting is as good as it can be.
Yeah, it's an important point and something that I was actually discussing with the directorate last week. So you're right. I don't think we are seeing that data, certainly at kind of this level. But yes, we made those revisions to the kind of follow-up pathway a few years ago, and they're still in place. It's very much been part of the kind of reset project that Aisling has done with the home treatment teams, the adult home treatment teams. So they are certainly where they're expected to doing those follow-ups. And we actually, myself, Sophie and Rachel, did a visit to the older persons home treatment team last week, and it's certainly happening there as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Ian. Good question. Sorry, Lisa.
A bit of an AOB question, and I'm mindful of your caution at the start, Andrew. So, if appropriate, we could move it to part two. There's been a lot in the press recently about it being too easy for people to have mental health conditions recognized and sort of relating to benefits and work. Just wondering if that's something that we have seen that we've thought about in terms of the implications it might have for the way we provide our services or our patients.
Yes, I mean, I've been very preoccupied about this since COVID, partly because a narrative started that there was a kind of increase in mental ill health or mental illness as a result of COVID, and I've certainly been engaged in conversations with Place about that, and it was interesting to listen to ministers talking about it this week, because some of the things they were saying, I have said previously. I think the bit I picked up on was that we need to kind of think about. I personally not sure it's always helpful to talk about this concept of mental health. We're talking about mental ill health and we're talking about mental illness. And I guess part of that work, for instance, the relationship between ADAPT and the hubs, is to try and work out what Oxleas place is in dealing with what is a kind of spectrum of need, and really trying to focus in on treating people with formal mental illness. I think the hub has a contribution to make to the fact that there's no doubt that the population's mental health or resilience, whatever you want to talk about it, resilience is a loaded term, has been impacted and will continue to be impacted by events. And I think COVID flushed some of that out, but beyond that, the cost of living crisis. So I think it's kind of opened people up to the fact that, I guess what a lot of us understood, that life challenges our resilience, and often it's things like money, somewhere to live, and having relationships that are the kind of key things to kind of helping people get through that. So I think the hubs contribute to that. And then if people need more than that, then our secondary care services come into it. I'm not going to make any comment about links to benefits, but yeah, I think that aspect of trying to think of mental ill health as a spectrum is probably quite helpful, and I think it's the same thing for adults and children as well.
It seems to me that this is a really important sort of almost philosophical point that we need to touch on, and is raising its head so much. And I agree with you, this difference between mental health, illness and all the rest of it. And I wonder whether it's something where actually we should factor in some time for discussion as a board, so that we at least have a common language about it. Because I think a lot of these words are used in different ways by different people, meaning different things. And if we don't have a common understanding of it, I'm not sure we do. I just wonder whether it'd be good to factor that in sometime in the near future. Yeah, that would be good if we could put that in. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Ian, for that report. And I think, as I hopefully is clear from the thing, there's a lot of really helpful green shoots that are emerging, I think, at the moment. And yes, let's fan those embers gently, to mix my metaphors very badly. Okay, we have, quite rightly, we spent a lot of time on that meeting. So I do want to ask future presenters to of these ones to concentrate perhaps on things that you want to bring our attention to. Can we now do the template for Ned's board meetings? And the first one is the Women's Services, Munisa.
Yeah, this was a great visit to quite a unique service that was set up, I think, 25 years ago for women who have experienced childhood sexual abuse. So it struck me that it was quite ahead of its time when it was formed. I'll just mention, for those of you that are not familiar with the service, the team structure is quite unique in that they have a few clinicians, but the therapy is largely provided by trainee psychotherapists. They have a connection with the university. So from a cost perspective, that's a great model. And I think it's, from what I understood, it was quite a positive relationship. Trainees want to work there, and obviously works very well for Oxleas. So the Julia, who's the team manager, I think has quite a lot of ambition for the service, and wants to grow it. And I think there are a few points sort of left for discussion in terms of how that service might grow. But I thought the model really stood out as a great way to deliver a service.
Nice to read. Any comments or questions? No. Sophie on Oxley's House. Oh, sorry, I do apologise, Steve. I didn't.
This is very quick. You just mentioned Julia, and I know certainly on a previous visit, I was really impressed with her grasp of knowledge and the metrics that they've achieved there. So I don't know if you had the same impression when you saw her. Yeah.
Good. Thank you for that. Sophie, Oxley's House.
Yes, so I'll take the paper as read. Avery and Shrewsbury, so acute female and acute male. I thought this was a really good visit, and I'm happy for Ian and Rachel to chip in, because we managed to talk to staff and patients, and we talked to staff, including staff like OTs. And it was kind of a microcosm of a lot of the things that we talked about today. There were three things I just wanted to draw out. There were the quote unquote small issues. So things like no room for people to put names on hospital doors, and ordering a table for an OT room that could take a year. And so they were small, but they were really big for the people involved. And it did make us think about how co-design could be used in future estates work to pick up on these kind of things in advance. And then there were, of course, the challenges around vacancies and violence and aggression that we heard about from staff. There was also the sort of system issues around working with partners like Queen Elizabeth, how to liaise with them when there's been incidents on the wards. And then there were those wider system issues about discharge. So staff sharing with us that patients had issues with housing, for example, and they had difficulties in getting in touch with care coordinators. So, yeah, it was all in all a really interesting and insightful visit, I thought.
Thank you. Questions or comments? No, thank you. Munisa, back to you for Greenwich West Adapt.
Sure. Again, take the paper as read. It was a great team, and sort of touching on some of the points we talked about when we started. Really, you could see high levels of energy, a lot of caring in the team. So that was wonderful. The issues raised by the team are kind of perennial ones: parking, cars, so on, which I know that the team is continuously looking at, and Sophia took that away, as well as kind of, I think, another perennial issue of sort of the tension between teams, right, where you have handoff points and referrals there. I think you're familiar with this issue as well, Rachel, but when asked about kind of violence and aggression, it was to the point, I think someone mentioned the badge of honor type, it was just taken as granted. You to sort of prompt, and the team probably acknowledged that it was underreported because it was just administratively, took time to put it in Datix there. So I think that's something you're kind of aware of, but they said it was quite commonplace. But otherwise, a great visit to what seems like a good service.
Thank you. Rachel.
Just to come in on that point, so we're hoping that our directorate leads in each area are kind of trying to create a culture where we don't just brush this under the carpet. And we know that people are really busy, and putting stuff on Datix can sometimes feel as though they don't get anything back from it. So we want it to feel as though it's a culture where not only is it acknowledged, but it's followed up on as well. And that does take time. But that's one of the big kind of things we're going to be focusing on over the next few years.
And I guess for one of my visits yesterday, it became clear when there had been an incident, the interaction with the Crown Prosecution Service and the police and us is obviously something as well that needs some working through at times.
The police do often join our violence and abuse subcommittee meetings to try and unblock it, but there is still a bit of a way to go, I think.
Thank you. Okay. Steve, Her Majesty's Prisoners of Rochester, Maidstone and East Sutton Park.
Yes, thanks. 3 visits in the day. I'm pleased to say the day definitely got better as it wore on. Rochester, tough prison. I mean, anyone who's been in prisons, you know from the first yard you step inside what it's going to be like, and Rochester's definitely like that. From a staff perspective, a lot of vacancies, and this has been fairly long term, so they are undoubtedly under great strain. Putting it politely, the engagement with the governor, and governors play such a crucial part in how we operate in prisons. Definitely the engagement could be better, and you'll see that's one of the action points going forward. The buildings themselves are very old and in poor condition. The head of healthcare there, who's a very compassionate and well-respected leader, she just needed some guidance, really. About she was taking on too much, and we could see that even while we were there. And we made a couple of suggestions on site, which I think she's taken on board. Very simple suggestions to make her life easier, but she needs a designated deputy, that again is being dealt with. She needs someone that she can delegate key things to. At the moment, she's taking it all on her own shoulders. So I think it's certainly worth a revisit in a short time, in the next 5 or 6 months. So that's all in plan. I'll keep going if I may. And then, yeah, Maidstone behaviour. The prisoner cohort here is pretty good. There's a lot of UK non-nationals here, so they tend to have experience of prison authorities elsewhere, coupled with the fact that they'd like to stay in the country. So it leads to rather better behaviours than you can get in other prisons. Very well established team, very well led by Ian. Controls there are excellent, and even they've got an infrastructure issue going on at the moment where they need to relocate within the prison due to a water leak, but didn't seem a problem for them. In Rochester, that would have been like the end of the world, but they were just going to move all their chairs and desks for a short period of time, for a couple of months. But yeah, very well run. All good things. All by the way, all the prisons were talking about away days, which Iffy and Ian will be aware of, and but they've got the funds to do that. So Maidstone visit was a good one. And then anyone who's had the pleasure of being East Sutton Park, if you haven't been there, it probably is the best prison in the country. It's for female prisoners who are coming towards the end of their sentence. They either work locally, and that sentence could be anything, from shoplifting to something a lot worse. And they either work in the local community or on the farm. So, they're basically very active. The deputy governor, who initially had been very critical of our service, but we've captured a quote from him there. He's now our biggest fan. So the staff have really turned that around tremendously. There is potential that they're looking to expand that prison, because it works so well. I'm calling it a prison, but you wouldn't feel like it it's more like a stately home. But if they do, their outcomes are very, very good. So they're looking to expand it, maybe as much as an increase of 100%. But it's got about 100 people at the moment, so looking to take that up more. And of course, at that point, we would be looking to reconfigure our own services if that applied. There was a very interesting discussion which only crops up really at the end around transgender issues that they've got. 3 of the prisoners are now going through that process. One is a female transforming into a male. One is a male who's come into the prison transforming as a female, and one at the moment, in the words of Sunita, doesn't know which way they're going to go. But of course, as you can imagine, that has caused some issues within an all-female prison. So we strictly follow the MOJ guidelines, which are primarily, I think, around the wishes of the prisoner, stroke patient. But I think it's certainly an issue that one would expect would develop over time and perhaps deteriorate. So it may well be worth a discussion and presentation at one of our development days. The final thing I should mention that, again, Sunita said, which I'd never heard before, but I'm not an expert on female health, but she said managing a prison with 100 female prisoners, and she's experienced quite a few prisoners, was the equivalent of managing one with 300 male prisoners. So I'm not saying that, I'm just passing that quote on. I don't know if he or Ian have heard that sort of thing before, but I think Sunita was just expressing the fact that although it's a fairly low number at East Sutton Park, they're kept very busy.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
I just wanted to pick up the point about transgender prisoners, because I don't think that the prison service has dealt with this particularly well. For those of you who are not familiar with East Sutton Park, it is, as Steve says, it's an open prison. It's has formerly been for women, and a really high proportion of those women have had serious trauma in their lives from sexual exploitation and abuse, and it has been based on their sex. That's why, very often they have an offending background. So it's the kind of prison where when transgender prisoners are based there, we would expect that it would have quite a profound impact on people who were there. The last time that I visited East Sutton Park, I met a woman, this has nothing to do with transgender issues, but I met a woman who was being stalked by a member of the local community because there is recognition probably that this is a particularly vulnerable group of women. So I think that it's wrong for us as an organisation to expect this to be managed, as it were, on the fly by the people leading the prison. I think that we need to have a very clear policy ourselves. And I think that one of the things that concerns me is the approach that has been taken in the past to placing transgender prisoners has been a risk assessment, and a risk assessment which is primarily about risk to that individual, not a risk assessment that's about the risk to other people. And that's maybe the way in which the justice field has looked at this. But I think that we have a responsibility to look at it a bit more broadly and to take into account that not only are we looking after women there who have had extraordinarily difficult lives, which have brought them very difficult mental health issues, but they have a combined challenge to face, which is both their status as prisoners, but also their history of abuse. So I wanted to really re-emphasize the point that Steve has made and that comes out of this visit, is that we need to think about this, as a major provider of prison health care, how do we think this ought to be managed? And do we think that just relying on the ministry to set the rules is appropriate for us?
So, Ian, I guess as somebody who's in charge of this at the moment, is there a forum in which are leads of these services and maybe leads of other NHS services provide, similar NHS organisations have a discussion around this? Because this can't be this must be a topic that is of discussion within the field, I would assume.
In terms of opportunities to talk about this with other providers, I think that opportunity is being created in London, where you've got a kind of multiple providers working. and there's a very clear steer from NHSD that we should be collaborating more. So there's certainly something there that we could take through. Obviously, we are the sole provider well, we're not quite, but we are the sole provider in terms of adult prisons. And so I think there's something about how we work. I think what I'm taking from what you're saying, Suzanne, it would be good to talk about this with other healthcare providers, but also I think it's about raising with prison authorities, probably above governor level, about some of the nuances that you've kind of brought out, particularly I think around the risk assessment, and just making sure that there's kind of better line of sight from a kind of broader range of people. Because I think you're right, what tends to happen at the moment is that we try and manage it along with people on the ground, and that's it doesn't feel satisfactory for anybody probably. So I'm happy to kind of take that forward. Yeah.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Our last visit, Burgess Ward. I think Jane, you're seeing your name against this.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Joe couldn't join us, so we went ahead with this one on this occasion. Just really want to say it was very positive. They've really made great efforts to help the people on the ward feel really included. So we went into a room that was set up as the ward round. It had a tablecloth, there were fruit, there were biscuits. It was real equity between patients coming for their ward rounds and the clinical team. And they were really proud of people going through their journey on the ward, really celebrating when they step down to a different ward. And these people often come back and stay in contact. So it was that really nice you could feel the difference they were making to people's lives. And most importantly was they've really embedded their Keep Me Safe. So it was really evident that they were proactive and preventing violence and abuse. And having been on the journey with them for a few years, it was really lovely to see that they were feeling brave enough to take patients that some other forensic units didn't feel they could, and having really positive outcomes. So for me, it was a really nice visit. There were some things that we need to address and put right, but they were the main messages. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Comments or questions? No. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for those visits and a really good snapshot of what we're doing across, and really helpful reports, I thought, as well. So thank you. I am going to point out that the only thing that's standing between us and lunch is ourselves. We now have the annual reports and accounts. Sally.
Yes, it's reporting time of year. So this paper is bringing a request for delegation to the board. So the annual report, annual governance statement and annual accounts, we are asking for delegation to be signed off formally by the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, but they will be circulated to all board members in advance for comment. And the quality report, as Suzanne has mentioned, will request that it's delegated approval to the Quality Committee. And then we also need to self-certify as part of the provider licence that this is something that we do every year, assuring that we meet certain standards around governance and involvement of governors, for example. And so we are asking for delegating approval of that to the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee as well. Thank you.
So the whole board will see the annual report, but people happy, and we'll have a chance to comment. Will people be happy on that basis? Thank you. Okay, we now go into committees reports, and so I'll turn to the chairs each at time. Quality Committee, Suzanne.
So I'm going to take the cover sheet as read, but I did want to add something to it. As people will know, each of the reports to board covers 2 quality committees, and the quality committee is a busy committee, and getting the pulling the minutes from the 2 committees together to share with board does sometimes present some challenges. The challenge that it presented this time was that we did overlook what I think should have been included in the report, and I would have included it under the advisory section, that we have heard in the last 2 committees of the patient safety group brings forward information about patient deaths which are or other serious incidents which are being reviewed under PSERF. Across April and May, we noted a total of 20 incidents which were going to be reviewed under the PSERF arrangements. And one of those that was reported this time around concerned a death that we hadn't picked up very rapidly. So the committee asked that information about that be brought forward at the next committee once we understood a little bit more about the circumstances. This was a death that was in the intensive case management for psychosis team. So I just wanted to advise the board that the first of the quarterly reports under PSERF will be coming to the Quality Committee in May. Had it not been, we would have specifically asked for a report on that particular death, as it was one that we had some concerns about. This did have taken us a while to understand that it had taken place. So I just wanted to add that because I think it's an important point that it's never a happy moment to receive the report from Patient Safety Group on some of the incidents that we've had. We've noted in our minutes with regret and sadness that we hear about these things, and that should have come forward to the board.
Thank you. Comments or questions? And we have the district nurses come up again, but we've had that discussion already. Thank you. Thank you. Mortality surveillance report, Jane.
Thank you. I'll take it that the report was read. It's been discussed at the Executive Committee and at the Quality Committee. Really, we focused on the report. We deserve better around learning disabilities and access to services for people from ethnic minorities. Elaine did present some really, really good progress of work that's going on within the Directorate and wider, but I don't think the report gives it credit. We had a brilliant operation performance review from Learning Disabilities this week, and they're doing some fantastic work around particularly cooking, nutrition, hydration, and the passports. And I just think it'd be really great if they could come and share that with the board, maybe at one of the strategic events, because we've captured some in the report, but as I say, it's not doing it justice, what they're really up to. It's brilliant.
Good. Thank you. So we'll note that in the minutes that's the case. Thank you. And it sounds like that would be an interesting thing to come to one of our strategic ones. Okay. If there are no questions, I will go on to the Business and Infrastructure Committee. Jo.
Yep, just a quick summary. So you can see in the alert section, we're talking about the overall planning round. And as Azra mentioned earlier, we will have an update, an up-to-the-minute update on that in part 2. In the insurance section, so our current year-end position subject to audit is a surplus of 3.6 million, which is in line with where we thought we were going to end up. And I just think it's always worth taking time. At this point of year, the focus moves to the planning for the next year and then how we're doing against that plan. It takes a huge amount of organisational capability to land on the number that you said you were going to land on. And our understanding of our finances, not just in the finance team, but across the organisation, is very, very strong. So just take a moment to sort of commend everyone involved in that. Obviously, as I said, it's subject to audit. We also came in with really close to our capital allocation. I think we're about 100,000 less. So well done to everyone on that. And then just to pick up, we've got a few things coming to part 2, largely around procurement. We'll pick those up then. I've mentioned Southwest Prisons, and that's covered here. And also probably worth mentioning the work that's ongoing on productivity. I think that's really coming together within Oxleas, and we're now sort of going to the next level to interrogate that data. Productivity is going to be all over the NHS, so we need to get used to it. We are, there will be some mental health productivity metrics that are ordained, and we're trying to influence that, and we're also trying to encourage our partner trusts in the SLP to come together with us to share and discuss productivity metrics, but that isn't necessarily happening at the pace that we would like to. So they're the points I wanted to highlight.
Thank you. Aswa.
I was just going in to just focus on that last point on productivity. So I'm jointly chairing the London Mental Health Productivity Group. We're just about coming to the end of drafting a set of productivity metrics. Both myself and Simon Henley Castleton, who reports into Ian, is on that group. I'll be sharing those. They should be available in May, and I'll take them through both the executive and probably the Business and Infrastructure Committee, and then we can take them through to board.
Thank you. Could I just make a comment about the productivity? Because I think all of us around the table understand what we mean by productivity. It's not about individuals working harder. It's about us working smarter as an organisation or as a system. So we all get that. But the word productivity doesn't have that connotation. And I'd just be interested in how do we think, as these metrics come forward, we communicate them to our staff in a way that isn't as a...
And it's very much about inputs for outputs, and ideally from that group, the point that Ife was making at the beginning about Dialogue Plus, being able to get a set of outcome measures that really shows the value of the work is where we need to go to. But we have got some real data quality and data input issues that we're going to have to cross before we get there, because that is incredibly variable.
Yeah. But I think we are going to have to find a language that we communicate about productivity in a common sight way to our people so that it doesn't feel like we're hitting them over the head with a stick, which we're not. It's a really important agenda. It's just the word is funny. Thank you. If there are no further questions on that one, audit and risk assurance, Steve. Oh, sorry, people, I do apologise. Nina, I do apologise.
I don't mind if you want to skip
No,
over.
I do apologise.
So on people committee, we on the issues that we would like to provide assurance to the board from a people perspective, staff survey. I won't go over what's covered in the report. We had a 1-hour presentation from the organisation that oversees our staff survey. Last year, we said we got the best results that we have in our history, and we got the highest participation rate. We didn't think it would be possible to beat those, particularly given the challenge of integrating the Southwest prisons, which was one that I think was larger than any of us perhaps expected, but we did surpass last year's results. So I just want to commend Rachel and the entire exec team and everyone around the organisation on the fantastic results. There were in almost all areas we were above average, and in a number we were significantly above average, including overall staff engagement and morale, and staff recommending the trust as a place to work. We also received, as we do on a periodic basis, the starters and leavers data, which Rachel has already touched on, and we agreed that we need to focus some further attention on the main reason for departures, which is staff's perceived limited opportunities for development. So there is further work that will be happening in that space. From a health and safety perspective, we had an overview of the health and safety audit results for the large majority of the trust, and some relevant background. We introduced a new audit system called iAuditor a few years ago, and in the first 2-3 years of introducing that system, there was a lot of hand-holding. That has now been scaled back deliberately, and we are maintaining those very high levels on health and safety, which is brilliant to see. This was the first year. It doesn't mean to say that there aren't areas that continue to need attention, and I'll come on to one of those in a moment. This was the first time that we had heard about the health and safety audit results on Southwest prisons, And although most have scored well, there are issues, not surprising, but issues that we need to focus on, and that there is a health and safety advisor who will be working closely with the teams in question to move forward. So those were the areas on the assurance side of things. On the advisory side of things, I'm not gonna go over the material that you see is covered there. The annual equality report is in the pack, and happy to take questions on those. You've heard about the areas of focus for staff survey. Ian has already touched on Atlas House. On the fire and the health and safety side of things, on fire safety, we have over the last year really struggled, if not longer actually, really struggled to recruit to the fire safety manager post. I've lost track of how many times that role has gone out to advert. We're now using a recruitment agency because we haven't been able to recruit via NHS jobs. There were a number of other initiatives that we tried that were sadly unsuccessful, but there has been an uptick in the number of fire-related incidents that we have witnessed, including 2 fires on ward. So we are going to have a deep dive at a forthcoming committee meeting, just to make sure that we are tying the various strands together in terms of the learnings that came out of the reports that were carried out on those fires and some of the other data to ensure it's all being triangulated. Lastly, on the advisory side, 2 fantastic call outs, both relating to the mayor. The first is the letter that we received recognising the work that has been undertaken by Oxleas in terms of the HS Today Trust of the Year and Sunday Times Best Places to Work. And the second was around the collaboration with the Mayor of London to improve racial equality. And Rachel touched on that earlier. One of those strands is the Smashing It programme.
Thank you, Nina. Comments or questions? I mean, I think we've got to comment on the staff survey results. They are just, they're just, Rachel and the team, it's a great one. Thank you. Okay, now Steve, to you.
Thank you. I'll start off with internal audit, if I may. So 2 internal audit reports given to us at the last meeting. Firstly, on digital strategy, which received a significant assurance with only low priority recommendations. I mean, that's quite a rare event, one would think, in most trusts. We were congratulated for clear and concise documentation, well-designed processes, a very good governance structure, and making clear outcomes, goals, and objectives. So basically, huge congratulations to Alison and her team. I mean, that's a great outcome. And then secondly, a joint internal audit and counter fraud report onto procurement. Again, significant assurance with only minor opportunities for change. We were commended for good control of single tender waivers and our approval limits process. The medium recommendations that were made were in response of a greater clarity on roles and responsibilities for the decision making, and cross-checking of suppliers and interests. This was quite a good one, actually, because it probably is something we need to improve in our process, because not only the declaration of interest we have through the executives, but also through other senior staff and governors. So it's a potential to improve our system. The report did highlight 5 potential conflicts, but just to let you know that they included, for example, NHS England and SARD JV, which we partly own anyway. So basically all the 5, which I did check through, weren't actually conflicts, but it was good that the report did pick up that potential for something in the system. But nevertheless, it was a significant assurance with minor opportunities. And then an overview from the internal auditors on the past year. So on the 5 reports that have come in, we've got 2 significant assurances unqualified, and 3 significant assurances with minor opportunities to improve, and we have no outstanding actions. Now, partly from what I've seen elsewhere, but I'd be pretty confident that there won't be many trusts across the country. 220 trusts, I think. There won't be many in that situation. That really is a great reflection on the way the organisation's working. So backing up Nina's People's report, that's pretty good going from an internal audit perspective as well. Moving on from internal audit, we had a presentation from Joe on and business and infrastructure. And I think Joe's already during the course of today covered the main points about the significant risks, the 4 significant risks that they've got, and particularly key ones about PFI and costs in the prisons, but we've already covered that previously. Finally, I would just mention on counter fraud, the referrals have actually doubled. They're at a low number. So last year there were about 11. This year to date, 21. So low number, but they have doubled. But as the auditors pointed out, or the counter fraud team pointed out, that is reflected across the system. Levels of counter fraud have gone up. Ours is still relatively low. If you look on it as 4,500 staff, it's less than 0.5% will be affected. And it very much is in the HR area, which isn't Rachel's fault, I rapidly add, but it does tend to be about things like people working while they're sick, or perhaps claiming overtime that they didn't do. So it tends to be small scale. So we are not talking of huge millions of pounds. This will be thousands of pounds, tens of thousands of pounds at most, but usually a small amount of money. And very often that money, either through our inquiries, we find it wasn't quite true, the original complaint, or we recover the money anyway. So again, it turns out to be maybe not as significant as we would think. But the key thing I just wanted to alert you to is that doubling of counter fraud referrals, but there is a context to it, which is not so disturbing.
And actually, sometimes an increase in identification is a good thing, rather than a sign of something going wrong. It might be a sign of us tightening up our processes, I guess.
I didn't think of mentioning that, but that is a very good point insofar as, of course, we've got a much better freedom to speak up system now, which probably also does play its part. And of course, the referrals, I can remember, like most of us, the days where we didn't get any calls at all through our system, but since it became independent, it has encouraged further referrals.
Probably the only number that's wrong is 0 in this case. Any questions? No, thank you. Well, Council of Governors report, Sally's agreed to give it on my behalf, since I'm probably not best placed to do it.
Thank you, Chair. I just really want to highlight 3 areas from the report. Firstly, the Governor's role in appointing Andrew as the new Chair, which was a very comprehensive approach, and they made the recommendation at the March meeting. Also, the wide range of developmental and involvement opportunities available to governors, both that have taken place and coming up. And also to note the upcoming elections, the nominations period will open in a couple of weeks. And I really wanted to highlight the work that Joe Manton and her team have done to increase the information available to people in working with the membership committee of the Council of Governors to highlight the role of the governors and putting on things like webinars so that people can find out more and encourage more people to nominate themselves and take part in the elections. Thank you.
Could I just say a few more words about the membership committee, which, as you know, is governor-led? Through our communications group, subgroup, we're making a big drive on recruiting members, and we see this as a two-way process. It's an opportunity for the members to contribute by making comments to us. It's also a great benefit, I think, that members can learn much more about the workings of Oxleas. From my personal experience as a service user and from working with a smallish charity who operate in the Oxleas area. People don't know how to navigate the system, and I think this is a real way Wednesday.
Thank you, Liz. It's a nice comment. Any questions for either Sally or indeed Sue and Liz? Thank you. Okay, committee effectiveness and other business. First of all, feedback on this meeting can either be in public here, or if you wish to take me into a corner and tell me something, then feel absolutely free to do so. But I think really think about, have we had enough time to discuss the issues that we want? Have we focused on the most important business, or have we skipped over the most important business in order to do stuff that's interesting but perhaps not valuable? Any thoughts or comments about the way in which we've done this meeting? Rachel.
I particularly enjoyed starting in a different way and kind of reconnecting with why we're here. I thought it was it unleashed a different sort of dynamic, I think, at the start of the meeting.
Thank you. Nina.
Just building on that, I wonder whether there's scope to incorporate things just in terms of our observations of patient experiences, other experiences. It felt that the meeting came alive in a way that was valuable.
Thank you. Okay, we'll think about how to do that. I think if we do the same thing every time, it doesn't work, but we do something like that. If people are content with that or think that would be useful, then I'm seeing nods around the table. Suzanne.
One's a comment and one's a question to colleagues. The comment is that I wonder whether we spend too long on discussing the board visit reports. I mean, they're a snapshot of one day when we visit people who are putting their best foot forward. And if I compare them with the data that come from, that we see at Quality Committee on a regular basis, they're an important part of triangulation, but what we're discussing in this committee is just that little bit. And I would welcome a little bit of rethinking about that. Not that we shouldn't be doing board visits and not that we shouldn't be reporting on them, but the amount of time that we spend discussing them at board. My question to colleagues is a bit about the chairs speaking to committee reports. I think that since we did our governance rethink, the 4A's report that we've started to use does give people a very clear view of what's happened in committees. And I find myself not wanting to add too much to that, but then other chairs, I think, feel that they need to speak to the entire 4A's. And I think I'm really looking at colleagues to see what you want. Would it have been helpful if I'd taken you through the paper, or was it enough? Is it helpful if if committee chairs speak to the 4A's, or is it enough just that they're there on paper?
Thoughts around the table? Awesome.
So I think for me, once you've actually read through the pack, you've got the majority of that there. So for me, it would be just highlighting if there was anything that wasn't within there, or some feel of the committee that perhaps wasn't committed to paper, but not definitely going through, I think, the 4A's, because I'm sure that everybody around this table is fully reading those packs.
Thank you, Sophie. And then Steve.
Yeah, just a quick response to the board visits. I agree with Suzanne that we do take time discussing them and they are just a snapshot. However, I just want to say that this is an important way for staff to bring concerns directly to the board and know that they've been heard. So just wanted us to bear that in mind if we're considering how we take them forward.
Thank you, Steve.
First of all, like Azra, I felt it was useful only to add points that aren't in the paper. No point in rereading the papers. I must admit, I do totally agree with Sophie as well. I think those board visit reports, and certainly from what I hear elsewhere in other trusts, they really envy and respect what we're doing on the board visit reports. I didn't think they were too long, actually. There could be that danger, but they're a very important part of what we do.
Just on the board visits, I mean, I think both the points are valid, and there's a sort of a tension in those, and maybe we should think about how we retain the best of what we're trying to achieve. I mean, I certainly felt aware, I can mention parking at every board visit. I don't think that's actually doing, I mean, we may be raising the complaints of the staff, but we're not necessarily in this forum able to do anything to address them. So I'm not sure that that is the kind of worthwhile. And we should maybe think about how, if we are talking about board visits, where we tailor the way we talk about them to achieve the purpose that you've just highlighted, Sophie and Stephen, rather than just kind of going through them. And just on the points that you made at the start, I mean, it is nice, right? And I wonder if we might think about, how we incorporate recognition as part of that. And maybe it's even an opportunity to give recognition to the greater staff.
Sue, and then Asma.
Just like to say, speaking on behalf of the governors, I think the reports that you get back are really important from our perspective to understand a bit more about the services. And I think, if I remember reading somewhere in the end, there's a hope that the governors will be invited at some point to come to some of the other outside visits, because that was really interesting for those of us who did it in the past, pre-COVID. So onwards and upwards. But I think they're really interesting reports and very worthwhile. So that.
I think having the content is really good. So having the paper there that you can actually read and see. I am just wondering, because all of them do have all of them do have actions. And I think if we perhaps just brought forward that action so that we would be able to feed back, I think that's the key thing that people that we visit want to know. It's, if I've raised something, is it being monitored and tracked, and is the board keeping on top of that? So we do normally bring it back, I think, once a year, but maybe doing that twice a year, and then making sure that we have that, why is this action not being moved, I think would be quite key.
Thank you. Iffy.
Thanks. I agree with all the points that have been made, but I wanted to speak especially to the board visits. We've got to remember that the reason we started this and the reason it's crucial is to ensure we don't lose track of what's going on in the front line. So I'm pleased that we're not saying we scrap it, but it's more about how do we present it here. And I think that it will be useful to think about what you've heard on the visits and how you share that with the board, with intention of conveying to the board what those frontline teams are feeling. That's really quite important, because what we don't want is to rely on papers that we present or data, but this is about getting a good feel of what staff are telling us on the front line.
Thank you. I think that's a really helpful discussion. I'm not going to try and come to a conclusion on it now, because I think we need to do some thinking about this one. Perhaps if Sally and myself do some thinking and then come back in the next meeting about, probably advance the next meeting for us to use the next meeting about how we play the thermostat, because I think all we're talking about in any of these is we're playing the thermostat. It's not an on-off switch. It's dialing up or dialing down, or concentrating on certain things. Thank you. Forward agenda, I think there's some items that we've clearly raised already, and I won't try and repeat them in terms of, well, repeat one or two of them, but in terms of, the transgender in prisons, I think thinking through what our understanding is of mental illness, mental health, etc., that we've raised. Are there any other things, apart from things that we've already raised, that will be captured in the minutes that people would like to see in forward agendas that aren't already there? No, thank you. Does anyone have any other business? Rachel.
Sorry, I wasn't quick enough there. It's not any other business. It's just to do with the forward plan, which is just that, obviously, as we agree the strategy for the next 3 years, we will also be bringing programmes of work back for each of those areas. But you won't see that on the forward plan now, because we haven't agreed exactly how those divide up. But just so that people are aware, there will be a big number of slots in there where we're talking through different elements of the big priorities as well as the core commitments which underpin them.
Thank you. Ian, sorry, miss.
Yeah, just hot off the press. Yeah, just to say that CQC have visited HMP Wandsworth this week, and we've just had the verbal feedback today. So headline is it was fantastic feedback and no requirement notices for healthcare. However, I mean, there's a lot of detail which I'm just looking at. I'm not sure the prison itself has come out particularly well, so we need to kind of understand that a bit more. But I think Andrew, you, me, and Iffy are visiting very soon. Actually,
Fairly soon.
Yeah. Yes. But I've sent thanks to the team down there anyway.
I just wanted to add that that's an amazing achievement by the team on the ground, and I think that the entire board would want to send congratulations to them for that.
Brilliant. Joe?
Yeah, just to add to Wandsworth, I don't know if all the board are aware that the contract has just been extended as well. I know we saw that.
For 2 years.
Yeah.
Thank you for raising that. That sounds excellent news, hot off the press. That's really strong. And clearly we need to think about how we support the prison become better within our purview. Okay, if nobody's got any other business, then we meet in part 1 again on Thursday, the 4th of July, same time, same place. So we now are going to break for lunch before the part 2. It's 1:05 now. How long do people want for lunch? We could either go for sort of like a rapid 25-minute lunch. So we'll meet again at 1:30, and it gives a chance for everybody to have some fresh air and some sustenance. So thank you everybody for a great part 1. Thank you.